Before I ever knew that I was a healer or a psychic, I was a public school teacher. I came from a family of teachers. I knew I wanted to be a teacher from the time I was 4 years old. I set out on that path and I never looked back. I got a master's degree in elementary education and I went into public schools and some private schools and did some teaching for a while. And it was about 7 years into that journey where I realized that there was something else calling me. I had a deeper call. Something was awakening within me that I wanted to do something else. I got a computer. I started writing, doing a blog online. This was like 2009, and the Boulder Psychic was born. I went to psychic school, started getting more training, started giving readings over my kitchen table, and diverged into this new path. In 2012, I handed in my resignation to teaching, and I went to Tulum, Mexico. I entered into some yoga teacher training and cashed in my retirement and was on a sort of sabbatical. And I thought I'd probably never look back and never go to teaching. And during this time, when I was on this sabbatical, as I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I knew that there was a part of me that still wanted to be around children, and yet I didn't want to be in the public school system. So one day I was up at this beautiful star house just outside of Boulder, Colorado, where I live, and I heard a talk being given by a woman named Sage Hamilton. And she is a long-time Waldorf teacher from this area and has served many families as a teacher here with her own home program after she went through teaching in the Waldorf schools. And she was telling the story of Rumpelstiltskin, and she was talking about this education philosophy, and I had no idea what she was saying, which I thought was really odd because, first of all, I had a master's degree in education. I thought I knew everything there was to know about education. So what was this education that she was speaking of that I seemed to know nothing about? I stayed after to talk with her, and I found out for the first time ever about something called Waldorf education. So I was so fascinated, I began to go and visit Sage in her school, and I would observe and be a guest, and then I became like a sub sometimes and just a volunteer, and I was so enthralled with this beautiful education that seemed so reverent, so deeply rooted in spiritual wisdom, so nature-focused. I loved it so much. I put that in my back pocket. I went on my merry way, and I built the Boulder Psychic and was giving readings over my kitchen table. After a couple of years, I went back to part-time teaching in a private school, and I spent a couple of years there, and then I became pregnant with my daughter, Sophia. And I knew it was time to fully take that leap, that I wasn't going to teach while I was having my child. So I left that job and I stayed home to be with my daughter. And I was so grateful and so thankful that I had listened to my intuition, that I had built up the Boulder Psychic and this healing business that I had. Because when my daughter was young, I was able to give readings over the phone, stay home with her. I remember being in bed, nursing her while having clairvoyant healing sessions on the phone. So it was such a beautiful stepping stone and really just showed me that there is this beautiful path, this karmic path, this beautiful destiny that I believe exists for us in our lives. So there I was for many years, perfectly happy as a stay-at-home mom and working on my Boulder Psychic business. And in 2020, when I was at the height of my business, Facebook shut down my ad account. I had really begun to market and advertise to people. I was finding women all over the world. I was having 10K months in my business. I was following this amazing system that I was teaching other spiritual people to learn and do online. And I was shut down in the blink of an eye. Overnight, my entire business model was wiped out. I was devastated. I remember going home to my mom's house, just putting Sophia in the car, driving to my mom's. I needed to try to figure out how to solve this problem. I needed her to care for Sophia so I could look at my work and focus on what was going on, because overnight it looked like my business was done. And in fact, it was. There was no recourse. I never got to talk to anyone. Got that ad account shut down for life. Thanks, Facebook. I opened a preschool out of my home. It was 2020. Everything was shutting down. And I really wanted my daughter to have friends to play with. I wanted life to go on as normal as possible. So I opened up the doors to the Linden Tree House, a Waldorf-Inspired preschool that I ran out of my home when my daughter was young. And here came beautiful children and beautiful families. So I threw myself into studying Waldorf education and Rudolf Steiner and this philosophy. Because when I quit teaching and I was home with my daughter, I was looking online for something for us to do together, and I came across this parent-child class. And when I read the description, it described painting and bread making and crafting and handwork. And I was just like, what is this? What are they talking about? I was trying to imagine how you were going to do painting with a whole bunch of toddlers. So I signed myself and my daughter up. It turns out it was the Boulder Valley Waldorf School. I had kind of forgotten about Waldorf. I was busy being a parent. I was staying home with my daughter. I'd set aside all those passions and studies from before. But when I found this parent and child class, I found an amazing mentor who was the teacher of that program. My daughter and I stayed in that program from the time she was 15 months or 18 months, I think it is, that you can go, until she was 3 years old when we aged out. And I learned handwork. I learned how to sew. I learned how to bake bread with children. I learned about watercolor painting. And I learned things about nature. I will never forget sitting in a Waldorf circle designed for little children, and we were singing songs for springtime. And one was about the cuckoo bird. Cuckoo, cuckoo, oh, do you hear it too? I know that just this morning the cuckoo sang at last. And this light bulb went off in my head. There's, this is going to sound ridiculous when I say it because it's like, yeah, duh. But I hadn't gotten it in this way prior to this. It's like there are distinct signs in nature that happen rhythmically every single year that we can count on. And one of those, or every season, and one of those is the sound of the cuckoo bird. I never realized that. I never realized that this was a sound that you would hear in early spring. I never realized that it was a sound heralding the time of spring. I also remember we were singing a song about where are the froggies when the north wind blows? We cannot see them in the ice and snow. Deep, deep down in the mud they lie. Froggies sleeping with tight closed eyes. I was like, what? Oh, the froggies sleep down in the mud in the winter? I didn't know. Because I was raised not this way. I was raised not with Waldorf education. I was not raised in the rhythms of the seasons. The first time I ever walked into that Waldorf classroom, there were these beautiful, it's called Lazur painting, I now know, these beautiful walls painted like peachy rose. There was a picture of the Madonna with child. There were beautiful toys that were so inspiring, and wool rugs and lambskin rugs, and everything was so lovely and so beautiful that I literally began to cry. My spirit recognized, my soul recognized that this was what was nourishing and healthy for children, that this was what my daughter needed, and that this was what I had needed when I was a child. You see, when I went to preschool, I did it like a Head Start program, and I distinctly remember the fluorescent lights, the linoleum floor, and the smell of bleach. That is not the most soul-informing, enhancing, warm for children, right? So when my daughter was born, And I was looking for this class for her, and I found this. I found Waldorf education again, and I found it through the eyes of as a parent and my child, right? And there were things that began to heal inside of me simply being in this parent-child class. I was learning to bake bread for the first time ever. I had never baked homemade bread. I was singing songs and kneading dough, and something was healing in my soul. Then we were doing handwork. I had never learned any handwork, nothing. So there I am, like learning how to sew, learning how to do stitches. And as I was using my hands in this way that I had never done, something began to heal within me. I remember I spent that winter in front of the fireplace after Sophia would go to bed, sewing, just sewing birthday crowns, sewing little felt toys, felting things, needle felting, this whole world of using my arms. I had learned in psychic school that our heart, right, is part of our arms and our hands, that these are creative channels, that we extend energy from our heart out through our hands. But I had never made something from my hands in this way. So it was very healing for me. And that's why I went on to open my own home program. I remember the teacher that I was with said, you could do this too. All you have to do is roll around on the floor and bake bread. And we're still friends, and she's still a teacher and mentor to me. And we joke about it because it's a little more complicated than that. The philosophy is actually much deeper than that. But it got me over the threshold. And again, it was this destiny moment, opening the doors to my preschool at this time of COVID when the world was shutting down, and I was opening and I was saying, you can bring your children here and we'll have a little pod and we'll gather together here. And it was so incredibly healing for me. And then as my daughter I continued my psychic business and continued doing my readings. And then as my daughter got older, I really wanted to send her to a Waldorf school. But it's very cost prohibitive. They are upwards of over $25,000 a year for the one that I wanted to send her to here. And so I began to look into other ways to send her there. And a kindergarten position opened up. I applied, and I was invited to come and work there as the morning kindergarten teacher at the local Waldorf school. And I began more of this deepening of my healing and spiritual journey. And as a teacher there, I'm required to study anthroposophy and to get my Waldorf certificate. So this summer, I started training as a Waldorf kindergarten teacher and studying anthroposophy. And it's very exciting for me because Rudolf Steiner is arguably one of the most prolific philosophers of our time. He wrote over 2 million pages. He published a lot of books. He was an Austrian philosopher. He created Waldorf education for the cigarette factories after the war for children to have a place to go to. So he created this education for the children of the parents who were working in these factories. And he was a clairvoyant. He has written so much about the difference between our body, our ether body, our psychic astral body, our soul, our spirit. What is the difference between these things? How do they work? He has books where he's laid it all out for you. What happens before we incarnate? What happens during our lives? What happens after death before our next life? He is a prolific, deep, soulful man who has had a lot to say and had a lot to share. And the fact that he's clairvoyant is so exciting and interesting for me as a clairvoyant. So I'm really excited that I'm here at a phase where I really feel like there's this natural merging of my clairvoyant self, my psychic work, my healing work, and this early childhood teacher part of me, this kindergarten teacher part of me, this educator. I've always been a teacher. I've always known I'm a teacher. And when I left my teaching career and jumped off the cliff and went out on my own, it was this very profound rite of passage I had to go through. I had to say, this is no longer what I'm doing and I don't want this job and I want to jump off this cliff and I need to know that I can support myself and that I can live life as an entrepreneur and that I'm not tied to these things. I remember I had done a Vipassana meditation for 10 days in California, and I was reading The Untethered Soul, and I felt that anything that I felt that I was bound to, if I thought that my source came from my paycheck or my job or my life insurance or whatever, that those things had to be cut. And for that time in my life, that was a profound, profound threshold crossing. And I did it. I proved to myself that I could go out on my own, that those things were not required for me to live, that being a teacher wasn't my whole identity, that there were these other aspects and these other parts. But now I'm having this beautiful integration that's naturally occurring, where I'm seeing this very natural segue into working with mothers and healing ourselves with our children and sharing about how my experience as a mom and as a teacher and being in Waldorf education is informing me about trauma and my past and human growth and development and how we can heal. And so healing with the children I work with now helps me to heal. Healing with my daughter and entering into Waldorf helped me to heal, helps her to heal. It's such a beautiful, beautiful path. I'm so excited to share it with you today. And this was supposed to be much shorter, but I really kind of got caught up here. But this is just the first video I wanted to share with you about why Waldorf. And I'm going to go in this series more into what is Waldorf education to me, share a little bit more about it, and how it's really deeply tied to spiritual healing. So thank you for joining with me today, and I'll see you in the next video.